If you're bored of the same old pasta dishes and want to try something completely new, let me introduce you to Mbakbaka, a Libyan dish of pasta and meat cooked with an insanely delicious and warming blend of spices. It packs a ton of flavour and is really quite different from any other pasta you've ever tasted. This dish will completely redefine your perception of North African cuisine. Hey everyone, I'm Obi, a home cook who wants to get you cooking authentic and delicious Middle Eastern food. Every week I cover a new dish from the region, and I break it down so you can replicate it perfectly in your home kitchen. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see new Middle Eastern recipes every week. Now this pasta dish is an absolute favourite of mine, and I grew up eating my mum's version of it. It's a perfect meal for a winter evening, and it contains a unique Libyan spice mix that I'll show you how to make. I put together this recipe using help from a Libyan friend of mine, and so now let's jump right in and make it. First thing we'll do is put together a Libyan spice blend called Bzaar. Now Bzaar is one of those ingredients that's hard to get outside of their origin country, and it differs significantly from one city to the next. I found a recipe for it, but the first ingredient is 7 spice. And what is 7 spice, you say? Well, it's another Middle Eastern spice blend, of course. Thankfully 7 spice is one I do know, and here's how you put it together. In a small bowl, I'm adding 1/4 teaspoon each of black pepper and cumin, an 1/8 teaspoon each of ginger, cloves and dried coriander, and finally 1/16 teaspoon each of ground cardamom and nutmeg. In total this will make 1 teaspoon of 7 spice, though you can easily scale it up as it's a great all-purpose seasoning. Once mixed together you should have something that looks like this. Now to make the Bzaar we'll need fresh ground caraway, so we'll start off by crushing 3/4 teaspoon of caraway as fine as we can get it. I crushed mine in a pestle and mortar till about the size of salt grains and helped release a lot of its licorice flavours. Then in a small bowl I added 1 1/4 teaspoons of ground turmeric, 3/4 teaspoon of our freshly ground caraway, half a teaspoon of the 7 spice we just made, and finally I added in half a teaspoon of dried coriander. Give it all a thorough mix, and when done I was left with something that looks like this. This is Bzaar, and it's an essential spice mix for Libyan cuisine, which packs a load of earthy and warming flavours that are great for winter dishes. Once again you can scale this up and use it in any dish or stew. Here it is side by side with the 7 spice. Apart from the spices we'll also need to dice 2 medium brown onions, which will form the base of our sauce. You want to get them to about a medium sized dice, so something that looks like this. For the meat I've gone with a traditional choice of lamb, and I've got 1 kilogram or 2 pounds of lamb leg cubes. I want the pieces to be a bit large, but these are too big, so I'm chopping them slightly smaller. I'm also including pieces of bone from the leg, as it really adds a lot of flavour to the dish. You could opt for veal or beef instead, and I've seen some people do it with chicken, but I'm not sure how traditional that is. Your meat cubes should be about this big. To start cooking I've added 1/4 cup of vegetable oil to a large pot on a high heat. Once it's hot we'll add half of our meat cubes to the pot and allow them to sear. This will take about 3 to 4 minutes on the first side, and we're looking for them to start browning. Once they've formed a crust on one side we can flip them over and do the second side. I was being a bit impatient, but you should know that when the meat is done searing it will unstick from the bottom of the pot. I let them sear for another 3 minutes on this side, and when done this is what they looked like. Nice patches of browning and caramelization all over. Pull them out and set them aside, then add the rest of your meat in and repeat. If you add too much meat in at once, the temperature of your pot won't be high enough for the meat to brown, so make sure to do it in batches. As you can see, the bottom of the pot is full of caramelized bits of beef, which is called a fond, and that's exactly what we wanted. Next turn the heat down to medium-low and add in the diced onion. Give it a mix and you'll notice that it's slowly dissolving the fond from the bottom of the pot. Once the onions have started to release some liquid, we'll add in 2 to 3 minced garlic cloves. Saute the onions and garlic for about 5 to 7 minutes until the onions have softened. You don't want them to caramelise, but they will go a brown colour from deglazing the pot. They should look something like this. When you reach that stage, add all of your meat back to the pot, as well as any liquid that may have drained off of it. It's common to add other vegetables to the dish such as courgettes or potatoes, and you'd add them at this point. Now we'll add the remaining ingredients to the pot, by starting with 4 tablespoons of tomato paste. We'll also add in 2 teaspoons of the Bzaar we made earlier. Follow that up with 1 1/2 teaspoons of hot paprika, which you can also substitute with a teaspoon of regular paprika and half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Finally you'll add in 2 1/2 teaspoons of salt and give the pot a mix to make sure everything is evenly coated. Turn the heat up to high and add about half a litre or 17 fluid ounces of stock to the pot to just barely cover the meat. Once it gets to a simmer, turn the heat down to medium and cover with a lid. You'll cook the meat until it's basically fork tender, which took about 45 minutes for my lamb cubes. You should check the meat every 10 minutes for doneness, and don't let the liquid evaporate away. Here's what my lamb looked like when cooked. Before moving on, there's one step that I'd really recommend and didn't capture on camera, and that's to peel out your pieces of meat and remove all the bones. It will make cooking the pasta a lot easier. When ready, pour in 500 grams of dry pasta and it will cook inside the sauce. The correct pasta type is either small elbows or small tube-shaped pasta. I went for mezzi rigatoni, which is quite a bit larger. Give your pasta and meat a good mix, and then add in enough hot water to completely submerge the pasta. Once it starts boiling, you'll need to mix your pasta every minute or so until cooked to the instructions of the packet. If at any point you find that there isn't enough liquid or the pasta is sticking to the bottom of the pot, then add in more water. When the pasta had about 5 minutes left, I added in 3 green chillies for some extra heat. If you've wondered why it's got such a funky name, Mbakbaka is called this because that's the noise it makes as the pasta boils in the sauce. At this point the pasta was cooked perfectly, and you wanted to have a bit of a soupy saucy consistency. I left mine on the heat for a tiny bit too long, so my sauce reduced slightly. Now it's time to dish it out and serve. There's no real need to garnish this as it just looks beautiful all on its own, and you can see how striking it looks with the large pieces of meat. The flavours coming from the pot are insane, so while it's still hot, I think it's time for a taste test. Insane. The flavours on this are just incredible, and you've got to hand it to the Libyans. After being colonised by the Italians, they took pasta and made it unreservedly their own. There's loads of earthiness and delicious warming flavours packed into the pasta, and the meat is just perfectly cooked. The Bzaar spice mix we made earlier was described to me as the flavours of Libya, and if that's the case then I really want to do a deep dive into their cuisine. I'm sure that if you give this recipe a try you'll really love it. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the recipe then leave a like, share or subscribe as it really helps the channel. As usual, all the ingredient maps and directions are in the description box below, and I'll be back next week with another recipe.